You're okay. Welcome, everyone. Ken Course here, and I am so excited to turn the tables on our host and our founder of Guts, Grit, and Courage, Kelly Falardeau. I'm so excited to have you here and to hear you tell a story that I've been fortunate enough to hear you tell before, but our audience is going to be shocked and surprised and happy to know you after hearing this story. So thanks for allowing me to do this, and thanks for allowing me to be here today.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Ken. So this is
So
gonna be fun.
as with everyone, we start with the core question. Tell us your story about your guts and your courage.
So, yeah, where to start? Because there are just so many stories of grit, guts, and courage, and like, oh, where do I start? But I think the biggest start is me getting burnt as a 2-year-old, and we lived on a farm, and my cousins were throwing shingles in the fire, and a spark came out and landed on my dress. And I ended up getting burnt to 75% of my body and spent 4 months in the hospital. And then every 2 years till I was 20, I'd have to go and spend another month in the hospital having some kind of reconstructive surgery.
Yeah.
So when I grew up, I never thought that, I'd ever have a good life. I was teased, I was bullied, I was shunned, I was picked on, all of that. I was called the ugly Scarface girl. And, it was a good thing that I was half deaf because I didn't hear a lot of what the kids said, but I never really knew where my life was going to lead until one day I went to a woman's event, and I had a different business at the time. And I was really struggling with my marriage. I was finally starting to realize that my marriage was toxic. I was in a dead-end job that I absolutely hated. But when I went to this woman's event, I met this lady named Charmaine. And Charmaine said, Kelly, you need to sell that business you're in and become a speaker. And I said, what? I'm just a burn survivor. So what? And she said, no, people will be so inspired by your story. Now, at that time in my life, I was realizing that, I wasn't in love with my husband, and I wanted to somehow end my marriage, but I didn't think that that would be an option for me because I had three kids. I was in a dead-end job. My business was bankrupting us, and so I didn't see myself as being inspirational. But she saw something in me that I didn't. And so I went home that night, and I said to well, now he's my ex-husband.
Yeah.
I said to him, I'm going to be a speaker. And he said to me, how are you going to do that? And I was like, I don't know, but it's going to happen. And so that night we were talking about it, and he was telling me all these reasons I couldn't be a speaker. Like, we were almost bankrupt. I wasn't successful. I didn't have a story. I wasn't Anthony Robbins. I wasn't Oprah Winfrey. I wasn't anybody like that. And he says, I just don't understand it. And he says, I don't understand why you think or how you think you can be a speaker. And there's no money in being a speaker. and he says, I'm not trying to be negative, but I think you've picked a hard choice. And so I just said, I don't know, but it's going to happen. And so that was the start of me becoming a speaker. And then from there, it was so funny because Charmaine said, sell that business and be a speaker, right? And so I did. I actually did sell the business, gave my husband his half of the money, and I left. And I left the marriage, and I moved in with my aunt and uncle. And then I had to deal with my job because I had a full-time job at that time too. And so my boss pulled me into the office, and she says to me, Kelly, you have a decision to make. Your performance review was horrible. And it was. She was right. It was the worst performance review I've ever had in my life. And she said, you've got to think about this. Are you going to be excited to come to work on Monday, or relieved if you don't have to? And that question hit me right to my core. I was like, oh my God. Like, I knew I wanted to be a speaker full time, but I had just left my husband 5 months earlier, so I didn't have his income to support me. And now she was asking me to quit my job, and I'm living in the basement of my aunt and uncle's house, and I've got 3 kids, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to survive if I don't have a husband or a kid or a house or a job? And so I went home that night and I was looking through this Christian businesswoman magazine, and every second page said, follow your passion full time. And I flipped the page and it said, follow your passion full time. And then I flipped the page again. It said, follow your passion full time. And it came to the middle and in big black letter that said, why do you not trust that God will provide you everything you need? And I slammed that magazine shut. I was so mad. And I was like, I know you want me to be a speaker, but how am I going to do this? And so I go into work the next morning and I hear that little voice again say to me, are you going to be excited to come to work on Monday or relieved if you don't have to? And I knew the answer. The answer was I would be relieved. And so I sent my boss an email. And I know that's not how you're supposed to do it, but I did. She was in a meeting and I just said, you are right. Today is my last day. And I sent that email. I packed up my office and I went home. And now I, have a documentary about my life story called Still Beautiful. I'm an 8-time bestselling author. I travel around the world sharing my story of, being a burn survivor, and, got a medal from the Queen and the Woman of Distinction, and all these incredible awards have all happened because I trusted myself and I listened to my heart when it said, are you going to be excited to come to work on Monday or relieved if you don't have to? And that was the biggest turning point in my life.
I can only imagine. And I know we'll talk about the success in a minute, but while you were going through all of this, how on earth did you manage to get through it? Like when you're going through living in the basement and being post all these things, what did you do to deal with that situation and get through those challenges?
Well, and it was really quite interesting because when I was living with my aunt and uncle, they didn't have an internet. So, and my business is based on the internet. So,
right.
so I would get up at 5:30 in the morning, go to my ex-husband's house. I would get the kids up in the morning because he had to be at work at 5:30. So I would go and then I would be with the kids and I, work there. Or I would go to Starbucks and I would spend all day at Starbucks working. That was one of the first things I did. The second thing I did, I got a mentor involved. And so while he was telling me I couldn't do it, there was people popping up in my life that said, Kel, this is your passion. You need to be a speaker. You need to write a book and you need to do all this. And so I really relied on my family and my friends to help me with the kids so that I could then follow my passion and do what I needed to do.
Yeah, that's amazing. So, what would you tell somebody who might be going through something similar right now or stuck in the same situation or, something, maybe even worse?
Ask yourself that question.
Yeah.
That question was huge for me. I didn't realize how much of an impact that question would have on me. And I've even asked myself that question other times where I said, I had to make a decision about something. And I said, are you going to be excited to do this or are you going to be relieved if you don't have to? And the problem is a lot of times we don't want to do it because we're so scared. We don't know whether the universe is going to provide for us. And so we're so scared to take that step because we're worried about people judging us. We're worried about not having enough money. And all these beautiful things that happened to me happened because I quit my job and became a speaker full time.
Right. Right. And that's obviously one of the gifts. But if you had to sum it up into one gift, what do you think you would say that is? Like the gift that you can take away from all of these horrible things that happened?
Oh my gosh, that's such a good question. What is I think if I would have stayed in my marriage and if I would have stayed in my dead end job, I wouldn't have had all these beautiful things happen to me. I
Right.
wouldn't have been able to go to Africa and, help the kids there. I probably wouldn't have a documentary about my life story. I wouldn't have had the Goalcast video that has over 10 million views.
Yeah.
I don't think that I would have pushed myself as hard. And in fact, that's what one of my coaches said. She said, Kel, I think if you had a man in your life, you wouldn't be working this hard.
Yeah.
and you wouldn't be, pursuing your passion because you'd be focused on the relationship. And the funny thing is, when I left my husband 12 years ago, I only actually had like 2 boyfriends in the whole 12 years. And I dated a lot, but then I would go through phases where I didn't want to date. And then I remember saying to myself, I just know it. I'm finally going to find the man when my kids turn 18 and they don't need me so much anymore. Right. And sure
Right.
enough, that happened. And so it's been so cool to just give myself that time to actually pursue my passion and become a speaker, become best-selling author, and now coaching people to write books.
Right.
And now I can also focus on having the relationship too.
Well, and it sounds like you're somebody that really has the visualization power. You say it to yourself and then it comes true, which has happened multiple times for you. This is another question that I would ask about this, because you mentioned that your kids were younger when you started doing this. What did your kids notice, or what did they say about you while you were going through this transition? Or did they notice like how much you were opening up and how much your life was changing? Or what were the types of things that they were saying to you?
So, that's a fascinating question, because I know that when I left my husband, I felt like I was being a bad mom. And I coined the term bad mom syndrome, because I felt like I was traveling a lot and I wasn't always home for my kids. And
Right.
so, and I had to work so much and I'd be on my laptop a lot. And I felt like I wasn't able to give my kids as much as they needed. But what was really fascinating is that just a couple of years ago, for Mother's Day, my son gave me a letter, and he would have been 18.
Okay.
And the letter was all about how he hopes that he can be even half the person I am. And it was a big long letter. He just passed it to me, and I knew then, I didn't even have to read it. And we both started crying,
Yeah.
but because it was probably the best Mother's Day gift I've ever had. It was a letter from my 18-year-old son. And I still remember this other time my other son, because I have twins. Well, I have
Yeah.
a daughter, and then I have a set of twin boys. And my one twin, I was driving him to school. So he was about 16. And he said, Mom, my friends often complain about their moms.
Mhm.
And I say to them, I can't relate. I'm so proud of my mom. I love my mom. And again, another moment when I'm crying because
Of course.
because I was struggling with, bad mom syndrome, and,
Right.
trying to do the best that I could do, and being a single mom, and not, being an entrepreneur too. You
Right.
don't
Of course.
always have money for everything,
No.
right?
No.
And then being an entrepreneur, you got to put money into your business, and that you also have to give money to your kids. And finally, in the last couple of years when COVID hit, I lost all my speaking gigs, but then
Mhm.
it made me go into coaching people to write books and become best-selling authors.
Right.
And so these last 3 years have actually been my best years financially ever.
That's
And
amazing. And it's amazing for that to happen. You're definitely a person that when the adversity shows up, you have to embody all those things to go, okay, I'm going to do this anyway. I'm going to keep going, like as hard as this is. And so, what we talked about advice, but there's obviously gifts in your story. What words of wisdom would you give somebody? Obviously, you gave them that really great question about, are they living the life that they want to live? But what other words of wisdom would you give somebody right now who's watching this?
so the other words of wisdom I would give somebody is to never give up. And if you have a passion in life, go for it. Even if you've got, your husband or your spouse that is, telling you it's not the right thing for you,
Mm.
go find a mentor that is going to help you. And that's
Right.
what really helped me, is that I stopped listening to him and I started listening to Charmaine and Jack and Cheryl
Yeah.
and Joe and all these people that were like, Cal, there's so much value in your story, even though I didn't see it, because I didn't.
Of course.
I didn't see the value in my story. I just saw myself as a struggling, single mom burn survivor.
Right.
And I didn't see the value in my story. And even now, there's still times when I think, why do people like that story so much? Like, I don't get it. And then the other words of wisdom I would give, and this is how I always say this at every show that I'm on, is it's a quote I came up with, and it's dreams are meant to be found, not tucked away in dreamland.
Mhm.
So
I love that. And all of you should be writing that down. For those of you, a lot of this that you can take away from this, you should be applying to your own life. And for anybody that wants to get in touch with you, obviously there's multiple things you do as a speaker and helping with books and all the different aspects of your business. Where do people go to find you?
so they can go to kellyfalardeau.com. Definitely they can go there and find me there. And yeah, that's probably the best way to find me
Sure.
is there. And yeah.
I love that. So thank you again for this opportunity, for having me here today and for allowing me to interview you. I love your story so much. And for those of you who don't know, all of these interviews and all of the people that you're meeting throughout this, even if this is your first one, are going into an amazing compilation book where these stories are told in even more detail. So if you haven't seen that, make sure that you pick up a copy of that book, that you support all of the amazing authors that are part of this and that have contributed with their stories. And for a lot of us, this is a hard thing to do. It's something that a lot of us don't normally do, myself especially, where I'm so focused on other people. I don't focus on my story as much. So I appreciate that. I appreciate your support. And thanks so much for being here with me today.
And thank you, Ken.
No problem.